Purpose, a caring approach to business.
Welcome, everybody!
Not everything that can be faced can be changed, but nothing can be changed unless it is faced. A quote by the visionary James Baldwin. Welcome to Pollinating Purpose, a caring approach to business by Pillar Nonprofit Network. I am your host and constant adventurer, Miriam Waligi. I also am the Social Enterprise Program Manager and Coach here at Pillar Nonprofit Network. For those of you who are new here, which will be everyone because this is our very first episode, Pollinating Purpose is a show about supporting organizations who seek to have impact in the work that they do. Whether nonprofit, for-profit, or grassroots organization, you'll learn key considerations to starting or growing your social purpose business with longevity and sustainability in mind. Along the way, you'll also hear stories from folks who are doing similar work in their community and hearing from leaders in their field on how to best approach this work. Today, I am so thrilled to have our very first guest as my friend, colleague, and director, Rachel Berdan. Rachel is an organizational strategist and heart-centered coach with over 10 years of experience in the impact sector. Rachel joined Pillar in 2019 from B Lab, where she built strategy and capacity to grow B Corp, brand awareness, and Canadian identity within the B Corp movement. Previously, she was the Chief Operating Officer for Our Traction, a London, Ontario-based creative marketing agency, and B Corp. Rachel holds an MA in Global Leadership from Royal Roads University and has navigated significant changes in leadership and hard pivots throughout her career. Rachel has developed the capacity to not only bring clarity and stability during internal change, but also spark innovation and collaboration in service of shifting systems. This is one heck of a bio, and it honestly doesn't even begin to cover how wonderful and incredible Rachel is. I am so very fortunate to have Rachel as a leader, a friend, and a colleague in my work. My understanding of how to coach and how to facilitate learning around the topic of social purpose business and social enterprise has been deeply and positively impacted by her presence in my work. She is one of my favorite people, as well as one of my dog's favorite people. I'm thrilled to welcome Rachel Berdan. Hi, Rachel.
Hi, Miriam.
Thanks for being here.
Thanks for having me.
And welcome to the very first episode of Pollinating Purpose.
I am thrilled.
Thank you. You have been along on this journey for a long time.
I sure have.
And I am very grateful for that.
Me too.
Okay, so very first episode, which kind of means we're just going to get into like what social enterprise is, what it can mean, all of those questions that you and I both get asked a lot. So let's just kind of start with that. Like, what is social enterprise?
What is social enterprise? I mean, it depends who you ask is usually the first thing that I say, and it depends what sector that person's from, because we have different definitions depending on where we come from. From my perspective, though, it's really, it's finding that space between how you make your money and where you find your impact, and how those things intersect. It's not new by any stretch of the imagination, and in fact, in many spaces, it is simply how business is done and how community is done in terms of, finding livelihood and considering the planet and considering community in a good way, shared prosperity in that context, that sort of thing. But if somebody were to ask me, what counts, it's really where the impact and how the work is done and how you make your money are inextricably linked. The difference being, like in a for-profit business with a CSR program, a corporate social responsibility program, it's really great that organizations do that, and it's not necessarily part of the DNA of the whole organization. It's a very kind of specific program that has energy dedicated to it around community impact, but that community impact isn't necessarily deeply embedded in the way that the business functions, or in the sort of charity nonprofit space. It's that sort of, selling T-shirts as an awareness building or fundraising activity, but that's, T-shirts aren't really the impact that you're trying to create in the world. So, again, those are really important activities, but maybe not necessarily exactly a social enterprise. But where we see those, business activities, money-making activities, and community impact piece really inextricably linked, I think, is at the heart of what a social enterprise is all about.
Yeah, I think, and I can't remember exactly what it was that you told me. We have many a conversation. But one of the things that I've sort of built from conversations with you is like this idea that the impact that an organization wants to have informs all of the decision making around, the service and the product that they're selling. Like
exactly.
That's how they're connected versus, that CSR approach, or the means to an end in terms of raising money is something that isn't actually a core part of the organization.
Yeah.
And I think you touched on a really great point about social enterprise, in that it's different depending on who you talk to, which is because it's not a legal structure. It is a definition, or it's a categorization of how you choose to operate your business, but it's not a structural piece. So, thinking about that and knowing that, what do you think are some key considerations to think about when starting your social enterprise?
Yeah, so, I think in all sort of, or in sort of dominant, I guess I would say, entrepreneurial spaces, so often the question is, what problem are you trying to solve? And I think that's a really important one. I think some added layers, or some really important layers that are not unique to social enterprise, but I think are really important to consider as well, is like, what problem are you trying to solve, but also why? What's your relationship to that problem? Are you thinking about doing for or doing with? That sort of thing. And as you get a few layers deeper into, I think, answering some of those questions in a good way, then I think you start to get to what do I actually need in order to get where I'm trying to go. So you're right. There is no true legal structure for social enterprise. They can be for-profit, they can be nonprofit, they can be cooperatives. Cooperatives can be for-profit and nonprofit. It's very complicated. I'm not a lawyer. I usually tell people that they should probably talk to one. But really, if you know what you're trying to do, why you're trying to do it, who might need to be involved, how you might want to make decisions, that can help to kind of narrow down at least what directions you might want to go in terms of the legal governance structure that will serve that purpose and get you where you're trying to go.
Yeah. And yes, definitely some of those conversations require people who are very skilled in ways in which, a coach wouldn't be. Like, it involves lawyers, it involves accountants. There are ramifications of making those decisions, or not necessarily ramifications, but impacts of making those decisions that you'd want to be well versed in.
Yeah.
That really decide, how your organization or business operates in the ways to serve the mission that you have.
Exactly. And actually, I was just talking to someone earlier today about, it's not exactly the same, but we were talking about the social finance space and how really, law hasn't necessarily fully caught up with the moment that we're in right now. And so, and I think that applies to social enterprise to some degree as well. We don't quite have legal structures available to do what I think so many folks want to do. And so I think it's important to I think coaching can be really important in terms of helping folks figure out where they're trying to go and why they're trying to get there, and sort of what's really important. And then, lawyers can really help with but this is what you can do within the context of what we're navigating and where it's actually possible to shift around the systems as they are in this moment.
Yeah. I hear ya. Okay, so we've sort of already touched on this. I'll reiterate it again so we can maybe answer it in a different way. But like, how are social enterprises different, from other models? We've talked about the cooperative. We've talked about you can be a non-for-profit or a for-profit social enterprise. Like, how does it all work? And how can they be similar? Like, how can they all be social enterprise? And what are some ways in which they're different as well?
Yeah. So I think, where social enterprise is maybe different from traditional for-profit business is really that impact first piece. And where social enterprise is a little different from your sort of traditional charity model is the earned revenue piece. And the earned revenue, certainly charities are moving more and more toward that sort of earned revenue piece as well, recognizing that we do need to diversify, for the sake of financial sustainability of an organization so we can continue on with mission. Here at Pillar, we do talk about like shifting to the middle, so recognizing that those are two different ends of a spectrum, and there is, we're in a place of kind of readiness for we don't have to be either or. There is a space for those two pieces to connect. So really, it's I think what is different and particular about social enterprise is really that sort of impact and financial sustainability to continue on with the work in a good way. Mm-hmm.
Just because we know that social enterprise is potentially a new term for a lot of folks. When we talk about earned revenue, can you expand a little bit more about what we mean?
So I was talking very specifically in the context of charities. So I think a lot of us are probably familiar with donations. So that's one way that you can receive funds as a charity. There's sponsorships as well is another sort of avenue. Grants are another sort of avenue. And I truly this language is weird to me because it's all earned. Like human energy goes into creating those opportunities for to earn funds, but also, when we're talking about earned revenue, another way to think of it is like money that comes in through what you might think of as sort of more traditional businessy means. So it's in exchange for a product or service. In a different way than sort of outlining in a grant proposal what's going to be delivered. It's all kind of weird and messy because human energy is at the heart of all of this work anyway.
Yeah, I mean, this is why when we talk about social enterprise is complex and it can be nuanced. It's because I often feel like this, this term sort of social enterprise has ended up being a little bit jargony and very much like a sector piece where, as you were saying earlier, this way of doing business it's been around for a very long time. It is the core way of operating for a lot of different communities. Trying to find that balance of, it's community care at its core is the community is a part of what, or I guess the benefit to the community is a part of what makes a social enterprise or a organization who's grounded in social purpose successful. That is a key element.
Well, and I think, building on the community aspect too, there are so many folks who start something for community benefit who may choose not to register as a charity for a lot of reasons, any number of reasons. First of all, it's expensive and it's a lot of work and there's a high degree of accountability, of course, but there are a lot of barriers to registering as a charity as well. And it's not the right model for a lot of things. It is the right model for some, and that's cool too. But having some degree of flexibility in terms of going about solving problems in a slightly different way than maybe the model might, the charitable model might make it sort of easy to do is I think a big piece. I think there's so much permission to have impact in a different kind of way in the social enterprise model. There's an opportunity to approach in a really entrepreneurial sense and pivot with the changes that simply will show up when you're intentionally working with community. Once you start to engage with folks in a meaningful way, exactly how to approach solving the problem emerges in a whole different way than you might consider before you start engaging with stakeholders. So being able to start in kind of a more informal way is really, really useful when it comes to that sort of community development, community care lens. And I think it's just, like I said earlier, we don't have to be in an either-or space. There really is a space for kind of both that sort of impact and financial sustainability piece.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and I think the piece around one model might not be the best model for someone, but it could be for someone else.
Exactly.
is such an important piece, because so often I feel that folks are either expecting to be told what the best option is, or they are being told what the best option is. And both of those are really difficult because, it's not a decision for anyone else. It's really, what is the best thing for you, your organization, the changes in the community that you want to have, and, the outcomes that you're looking for. That's what makes something better or less than better. You know what? I'm great at this. But that idea of it's what makes something better or less than ideal for someone is going to be a very different parameter for one person to the next, for one organization to the next. So yeah, we can't be very prescriptive about it because it's so subjective.
It is, yeah.
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 Yeah, okay, perfect. Okay, so now kind of leaning into some pieces that we mentioned in your bio of your 10 plus years in this space and your time coaching. So as someone who has coached social enterprises, having previously been in my role as the social enterprise coach here at Pillar, what are some of the first questions that you get asked from folks seeking support?
Mm-hmm. I mean, one of the first questions I almost always would get asked was, is this a social enterprise? Which, often, I think we've kind of said this in a number of ways, but it's sort of, sure, if you want it to be, with the exception of a few, if there's, extraction in your industry name, probably it's going to be really hard to get around to making that a social enterprise, with the exception of a few very clearly and very essentially extractive and exploitative industries. Yeah, it can be. Again, if you're earning, if you're using business strategies and you're earning money in a way that is inextricably linked from to your impact, then yeah, sure, it can be. So that really was, one of the first questions. The other one is, it was our opening question, which is what even is a social enterprise, and what is the right legal structure? We did talk about that a little bit too. And then, honestly, a lot of it is, am I doing this right? And I think that's where the personal relationship with the impact that you want to have in the world is such an important piece of social enterprise development. Because the answer, if you're truly, seeing and particularly directly impacted by the problem that you're trying to address, but seeing a problem and really connected with that in a deep personal way, and have a deep personal why attached to, seeing a gap in the market, if you will, for to use that sort of entrepreneurial language, then I mean, you're probably doing it right to some degree, right? I mean, obviously, it can be helpful to get a little bit of support around, what do I need to think about financially is another piece. And I think, I always come around to, well, what do you need financially in order to do what you're trying to do? I think so often in the entrepreneurial space in particular, and I would say, the nonprofit sector is a little newer to me because I came into my work through the private sector, but I think in our space as well, the way that we think about impact is so often funder driven rather than heart driven, which it has its reasons, and I get why that is. Capacity's tight, you focus where you need to focus. But at the end, and in the entrepreneurial space, so often we grow because you're supposed to grow, and you get to a certain point, and then you're supposed to scale. I think we come around to but what actually feels right for you, again, in terms of the impact that you want to have, and the the way that you want to have a business and be in business. If you can answer those questions in a way that, you can look at what you're doing and you can, see the link between what you're doing and feeling aligned to the work, then you're doing it right. Yeah. So I know you didn't ask me to answer the question that I most often get, but I do think it is one of the big ones is like, am I doing this right? And I think it's important that folks hear that, like, if you're heart aligned and you're like, able to pay the bills, then you're doing it right.
Yeah, you're doing okay.
Yeah. And then the other one often is where can I get money? How can I get funded? Which has both real answers and also the question of, how much do you need to do what you're trying to do for right now? Because I think sometimes, again, folks are encouraged to get funding without, because that's the natural next step, and sometimes it's the right next step, and sometimes it's not. So I think those are important conversations too.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Going back to something that you said earlier around, that piece of like, if you know why you're doing this work, something that I like to ask folks when I start coaching them is, why are you the best person to be doing this?
Exactly.
And that's not a challenge, but more, this invitation for reflection. Because typically, if your heart is in the right place and you know why you're doing this work, it's a fairly easy answer. You either have some sort of like lived experience or lived expertise that makes you a good fit, or, you're seeing the community around you, the community that you're a part of, and want to address that in some way, and you feel like you can. But if you can't answer that, then that's also a good thing to reflect on.
Exactly.
Yeah. Okay, so we've talked a little bit, about the time that you have spent coaching, and, that kind of leads to these conversations around like changing things and moving things forward and transformation. So now at Pillar, what you doing?
What am I doing? Yeah, so we've been through some title changes, and so by way of title, I'm the VP of Transformation and Community-Based Economy. And what that actually means is so much of the work that I'm connected with is certainly your work with the Social Enterprise Incubator and social enterprise coaching. I get to be connected, arm's length to some of that work. I'm also connected with Verge Capital, our social finance program, the Women of Ontario Social Enterprise Network, which is a province-wide program supporting both direct, capacity building or direct support for social entrepreneurs, and also working with folks who provide support to entrepreneurs to help them understand maybe different ways of thinking about the way how they approach their work. So providing that one-on-one connection to folks who are starting something, as well as supporting some necessary systems change in terms of kind of how we approach and think about business through an intersectional gender lens. So I get to sort of touch all of those programs and try to connect them back to our mission as an organization, our strategic plan, and ensure that we have a good sort of two-way flow around. We have many years of providing support to charities and nonprofits, and moved into social enterprise a few years ago. Continuing to really do some network building and engage in some good movement within the sector, I hope, as we listen to folks who directly need our support and consider what else we can do as an organization as we listen to and learn from the communities that we engage with.
Perfect. Thank you. Okay, so I have written down here that normally we ask folks, you are my first episode. So in the future, I will be asking folks to share a bit more with the audience about where they can find out more about their organization. I kind of cover that for Pillar. Yeah. So instead, can you share a social enterprise that you support, that you care about, that you appreciate, and where they can find out more about that social enterprise?
Yeah. So as I was thinking about this, of course, I've had the benefit of connecting with numerous social enterprises in my own work. And I continue to hear about great organizations, both through the work that you do and that we do through Verge Capital and through Wozen, and many of the other connections that we have in community, and I tend to operate that way anyway. But Salt Leisure Wear is the first organization that came to mind for me, and they do. It's kind of what it sounds like: leisure wears, active wear. And particularly, they have a line of sort of adaptive clothing for folks who have medical devices, and that's something that's actually near and dear to my heart. I have a loved one who may need those items someday, and he's not quite in their age range in this moment, but one day I think he'd be right in their target market. So very near and dear to my heart, and I think a really cool one because they are a Verge investee. So a great way to find out more about them is to visit the Verge Capital website and check out the story about them. They also went through the Libro Social Enterprise Incubator. You and I coached them together actually as we were transitioning our roles, and have also been connected to the Women of Ontario Social Enterprise Network. So it's a great blend of personally, I care about the work that they're doing, and they recently did a pop-up in our physical space as well. So I think also a great example of kind of making really, honestly, I think good use of the various supports that Pillar offers as well.
I would agree. Okay, amazing. Thank you so much, Rachel. As you know, I'm always thrilled to speak with you. And
me too.
Thank you for being our very first guest.
Thank you so much. I've been looking forward to this for some time, and I am thrilled to be part of it.
Thanks. Thank you once again to Rachel Berdan, Vice President of Transformation and Community-Based Economy here at Pillar Nonprofit Network. And if you'd like to learn more about Pillar as an organization and the work being done, head on over to our website at pillarnonprofit.ca. And thank you again for joining in on the first episode of Pollinating Purpose, a caring approach to business. Once again, I am your host, your guide, your business bud, Miriam Wolici, and it has been a pleasure getting to chat with you. Thank you for joining us on this ride, and we'll catch you next time.